Hey, I got the Discover Banff and its Wildlife tour today. Last night at home I went on to Ventrada so I could see when my first pickup is. It's at 8:10, which means I need to be here 45 minutes before, so 7:25. And the first order of business is to get keys for the bus and the bus phone. I'm in Luxton. There's Luxton. I've got Luxton's phone. One thing I like to do is just make sure it's fully charged and the volume is up. Good. And then you can go ahead and log into Geotab. So now I've got my phone, my vehicle's started, it's running, it's been inspected. So now I've probably got about 25 minutes to get ready for the tour. I like to grab one of these little baskets here. I've got the slides that I'll use for the day. I have 13 people. I need 13 cups. I need 13 packs of cookies. And we need some hot chocolates. Hot chocolate looks like this. You can take a thermos. This water is really hot. Put about maybe a third full of hot chocolate. This thermos will just work for 13 people. Any more than that and we'd need another one. Put in about, the formula's on the wall here, but you put in just about almost 2 scoops of hot chocolate. Give that a little shake. You also have the option for hot water in the winter. We'll have hot water in these things, and we also have the kettle here. But if you're the first one in, you can use the hot water. It's just a small hot water tank in here under the sink, but it'll work for one person. There. Shake. And then you need your manifest. It's just about time to go. You wait until about 5 to 10 minutes before departing. Get your manifest. I went on to Ventrada. It's here. I've already got it printed off. It's 13 people. My first pickup's at Banff Ptarmigan Inn for 2 people, and then we'll go from there. Throw that in here, throw the bus phone in there, grab my own bag, this too, and I've got everything I need. Yeah, before pulling away, so vehicle's inspected, I got all my supplies. I'm gonna leave 10 minutes before my first pickup, so it's at 8:10, which means I leave at 8 o'clock, depending where that first pickup is. This is something you gotta use a bit of judgment for. And then it's adjust your mirrors. So we have adjustment here above the visor. You've got 4 mirrors, like 2 on each side, and you can put it on, say the top. I like where they are right now. We'll move the top one a bit. Okay, there we go. And then just turn those back off. Then release the park brake, and ready to go. Alright, my first pickup is the Ptarmigan Hotel. And your strategy here when you're doing pickups, you want to pull up in front of the hotel, but also pull up as far as you can, so another bus or another tour company can come in behind you. So I'll pull right up as far as I can, watching I don't hit the curb. Put on the 4-way flashers, put the vehicle in park, set the park brake, and then turn it off. Now you're ready to go in and find your guests, and to get your guests what you need is the manifest, of course, but also your phone. This is the phone Rez is going to phone you on, and again, just make sure the volume's turned up. They might be trying to phone you. So I got that. I got the phone. If the guests are already here, you're just obviously just going to greet them and get them on board. Ask them where they're from, their names, where they're from, where they're visiting from. Get them inside. Just say grab any seat that you like, and grab a couple seat belts as well, because we're going to start wearing seat belts right from the start. If your guests aren't waiting outside the hotel, well then you got to go find them, and for that you're going to head inside the hotel. Come on. Quite often guests will just wait inside, like we do hotel pickups, so they might be sitting at a seat inside. You can go in, get the guests. Now if they're not inside the lobby either, then it's time to go to the front desk and ask the front desk agent if they can look up the last name for you. In our case here, the last name's Herman, so H-E-R-M-A-N. I just kind of show them the manifest so they know it's legit, that we're a company, we're not just, you know, asking for somebody's name or if they're staying here, and then they'll phone the room. If they still can't get them, then it's time for somebody to phone the guests if they have a phone number. For that, you could try on your own. If it's a North American number, use the cell phone, give them a call. Failing that, though, then it's time to call reservations and see if they have some information that maybe you don't have as a guide, and they can try and get a hold of the guests as well. And the important thing here is if the guests weren't here at all, you can't find them, you check the front desk, you check the lobby. Some hotels have more than one lobby, so make sure you check both lobbies. If you can't find the guests, then it's not your call to just take off. You have to wait until you're cleared by a reservations agent to go to the next hotel. So on this vehicle, Luxton, for me, once my guests are on board, I can just get back inside this door right here. But that's not true of every vehicle that we have. Some you have to go around to the driver's door, and you want to do it safely. So it looks like this, like you're just going to come up here. You might be in a rush, but don't rush this. You're going to want to come out, look around, see if there's somebody coming before you get into that door. Like I got 2 vehicles coming right now. 3 actually. And just wait. And then once it's clear, then you can go ahead. You can go ahead and get inside your door. Okay, so we're pulling up to the Mount Royal Hotel, which is kind of a hub pickup for us. We get a lot of people here that might drive in from Canmore or staying at an obscure place. Anyway, they can choose this as a pickup. There'll be a lot of people here in the summer, and when you pull up, there might be 2 tours going out at the same time, so you got to sort out with the people standing in the parking lots who's on which tour. If they're on a different tour, say, oh great, well you're with Anik today, you guys will have a great tour. Take just the people that you're supposed to get, make sure you check the last names. Don't head off with anybody that you don't need. Again, put the bus in park, set the park brake, turn it off. Don't idle our buses here, well really anywhere, but especially not here at the Mount Royal Hotel. And then there's 3 places you're going to check for guests here, because you don't know if they've just picked this as a pickup location, they're coming from somewhere else. They might park here or whatever and wait here, but they could be staying at the Mount Royal. So there's also the front desk. But this is an interesting, kind of a different pickup in the sense that you've also got to check Banff Avenue out front. So come with me and I'll show you that. Hey, this is the entrance to the Mount Royal Hotel, and sometimes your guests will be waiting here too under this canopy instead of out in the parking lot. Or you go inside to the desk here. We're not going to film inside their hotel, obviously. And then the other thing that you need to do here is you can walk right through this hotel and go out to Banff Avenue, and you might have people waiting for you out there. So all that has to be checked here before you phone res with, you know, saying that you don't have a guest here at the Mount Royal Hotel. So let's go out to Banff Avenue and see what that looks like. So now we're on Banff Avenue in front of the Mount Royal Hotel. And in the summer, this is a pedestrian zone. And Open Top Tours has a booth set up here that's also blue. Sometimes our guests are waiting at that. They think that's at our tour. Or they could just be waiting along here, or could be inside the lobby. And of course, you've already checked at the front desk to see if there's anybody there. Now I'm just going to go back through, and it'd be at this point that I would get on my phone and be phoning res and say, hey, I can't find Mark Jardine at the Mount Royal Hotel. And that gives, you know, a little lead time or whatever. I get out to the bus, and then they'll eventually clear me to head to the next hotel. Right now we're pulling up to the Banff Springs Hotel. This just happens to be our last pickup today. This is where we have 2 guests to pick up, but regardless, this is where the Discover Banff and its Wildlife Tour starts, is here. So you drive up, you go around the roundabout, you're circling around William Cornelius Van Horn here, General Manager of the Canadian Pacific Railway. We'll introduce him to our guests once we've got everybody on board here, and we've introduced the tour in general. And at the Banff Springs here, if there's a lot of buses, this could be a bit of a tricky place to park. There's more options than just the motor coach entrance here, but this is where we come with our buses. We can also park along the street down here if this is full of tour buses in the summer. One thing we don't do here with our tour buses is drive on to the main entrance and go under the canopy. In fact, you don't take our buses really under any canopies around town until you know which canopies we can fit under and which canopies that we cannot fit under. So last stop here. So here's where we're going to start the tour. Again, it's set the park brake, vehicles in park, shut it off, just like all the other stops. And then this is just hypothetical here, of course, but I'm going to get 2 more guests. They're going to come on board. As they're jumping on board, I'm going to say, hey, where are you guys from? They're from Illinois. They'll come on board, and I'll say, here, we got some new folks here from Illinois. These will be your friends for the rest of the day here from UK and California and so on. Alright, welcome to Banff and welcome to Discover Banff Tours. Good to see everybody here. So if I can remember correctly, we've got folks from, what was it, Illinois, California, Florida, UK. Great to have you all here. Great to see people back visiting Banff. We'll be together for about 3 hours this morning. So this tour is called Discover Banff and its Wildlife, and it's kind of a tour. We go from one stop to another. We've got some restroom breaks along the way. There's some lakes, there's some waterfalls, there's some historical sites, hopefully some wildlife a little later in the tour when we get further out of town. Along the way, I have to ask you guys to wear seatbelts. So if you put your seatbelts on, we'll wear those throughout the morning. And our first stop is going to be Bow Falls next. But first, it's fitting that we start the tour here, because if you look out this way, we have William Cornelius Van Horn. He was general manager of the Canadian Pacific Railway. When the railway came through this valley in 1883, William Cornelius Van Horn said, hey, if we can't export this scenery, let's bring the people in. That could help recoup some of the cost of building the railway across Canada, the whole point of which was to bring the colony of British Columbia into Confederation, promote east-west trade. And then we have the Banff Springs Hotel too, kind of the castle in the Rockies, the crown jewel. Beautiful hotel built with locally quarried Rundle stone that comes from the Spray River just behind the hotel here. We'll see some of that when we get down to Bow Falls. And other than that, I think I'm going to get going. I'll introduce myself as we go. I've got a microphone. I'll tell you a bit about myself, introduce you to this town that we live in and that we all love. And then we'll be on our way to Bow Falls to learn a little bit about Marilyn Monroe. Welcome to Bow Falls. So this is one of our first stops. This is our first stop this morning. Beautiful location. We got Bow Falls here, which you guys can see, especially on the left here. We have the river, and we're going to be here. It's 8:50 now. We're going to be here till 9:10, so for 20 minutes. And some of you might choose to hang out with me by the river, and I'll help out with photos. You'll learn a little bit about Marilyn Monroe, about the river itself, the waterfall. Other folks might choose to hike up the steps, which you can see just right there. You see those? Yeah. And head up the steps and you can kind of look down at the waterfall. Use your judgment, it's kind of a steep climb. Myself, I'll be hanging out down by the river, chatting about Marilyn Monroe, and I'll help you guys out with some photos. Okay, welcome to Bow Falls. A bit of a chilly morning here. What do you think is the coldest temperature we ever had in Banff? It was -51, January 25th, 1950. Hottest day, hottest month is usually July. Hottest day was 2021, 39 degrees Celsius on July 3rd. And then you might wonder, how much snow do we have in Banff? Greatest snowfall in town here was 52 inches, 132 centimeters back in 1972. And the wettest month of the year is definitely June. One old outfitter here, pioneer outfitter Fred Stevens, he said in June it rains 7 days out of 6. And I promised to chat about Marilyn Monroe, and here she is. She was here in 1953 filming The River of No Return, actually kind of split between Jasper National Park and Banff National Park here. And she co-starred with Robert Mitchum. She was with Joe DiMaggio at the time and staying behind us up here at the Banff Springs Hotel where we just left. And on her visit to the Canadian Rockies, she injured her ankle on set. And part of the premise of the movie is that she actually goes over Bow Falls as well. So here's a picture. It's a mannequin, of course, and there she is heading over the falls. I can hand this to you guys in a sec for a closer look, but here's Marilyn with some black bears at one of our campgrounds back in 1953. Her at the entrance sign to Banff. And we still have a lot of movies filmed in this region, but not in the park anymore. So filming Hollywood movies in the park was discontinued not too many years after Marilyn was up here, and most of that takes place outside the park now. And then you've also noticed the river here, a beautiful river. This is a long river system. It starts up at Bow Lake, for some of you might have been up on the Columbia Icefields Parkway. The Bow Glacier, in fact, would be the source. And then this river, it comes through Lake Louise, then through Banff here, and it's going to go all the way out to Calgary, down to Tabor, Alberta. And there it joins the South Saskatchewan River. And then it goes along its way into the province of Saskatchewan, joins the North Saskatchewan River, goes all the way across the province of Saskatchewan, north of Lake Winnipeg in Manitoba. This all culminates in the Nelson River, and all of this water is going to end up at Churchill, Manitoba, up at the Hudson's Bay. That's up where the polar bear tours are. Okay, welcome to the Park Administration building. This was originally the site of a sanatorium that was operated by Dr. Brett, who was actually Alberta's second lieutenant governor, the King's representative here in Canada. A beautiful location, a beautiful garden. The sanatorium was a luxury hotel, and people would bathe in the mineral waters and receive some health benefits from that. That was the claims during the day. That fell into disuse, disrepair by about the 1930s, and starting in 1930, In the mid-1930s, the park administration building was built here as a public works, a Depression era public works project. Everything designed, the whole town in fact, designed to line up with Banff Avenue. If you look out to the right, it lines all right up with Cascade Mountain. Really beautiful. We're going to spend 15 minutes here. We'll leave here at 9:40. And a few things you can do here. You can wander around the grounds down to where we just lined up with Banff Ave there. And I can help out with photos of you folks there. That's the iconic view of Banff. Then we have restrooms over here on the right, the building with the green roof. And then we have the Cascade Gardens of Time, which you're seeing right in front of us. And some of you will choose to wander the trails around Cascade Gardens. And like I say, I'll be available for photos back down at that sign that lines up with Banff Avenue. And again, we'll be here until 9:40, and then we're going to head off to a great view. We'll be on the other side of the river above Bow Falls, checking out the Banff Springs Hotel at a place called Surprise Corner. Again, welcome to Cascade Gardens. Yeah, so again, the town of Banff, I mentioned earlier how William Cornelius Van Horn said, if we can't export this scenery, let's bring the people in. The railway came through the valley in 1883. The hotel, Banff Springs Hotel, built in 1888. And then the town, of course, designed to align with Cascade Mountain, one of our nicest views. And here at Cascade Gardens in the Park Administration Building, we commemorate James Bernard Harkin, who was the first commissioner of the Dominion Parks branch, which later became our National Parks branch. And he was a big believer in the value of wilderness in terms of dollars. So he would make a pitch to Canada's members of parliament and say, hey, if we log this area or mine this area, here's what it would be worth. Or if we reserved it for visitors and created a national park, here's what it would be worth. And he would always make the pitch that it would be worth much more over the long run as a place that people could visit. And then the gardens itself here, the whole grounds at the Park Administration Building, local people here, Canadians in general, this is kind of the heart of our National Park Service. And we see the gardens and how well kept they are and the care that the Park Service takes of the landscape here and the gardens themselves. And it represents our National Park Service's duty to care for the park for Canadians and for international visitors. Welcome to Surprise Corner. Beautiful location here. We've got the Bow River to our right, down below Bow Falls where you were earlier. Some of you that went up the stairs, you'll see the stairs where you were down there. And then of course the Banff Springs Hotel. And there's a viewpoint here where we can get up there and get great photos of the Banff Springs Hotel, and we'll be able to see the gondola when some of you are heading up later. Our safety is important here, so what we'll do at Surprise Corner, we're going to pull up, I'll get the bus parked, and then we're all going to meet right in front of the bus. Then I'll push the button, and then we'll cross together as a group. Because maybe the reason this is called Surprise Corner is because it's a little bit of a blind corner. We're unsure of the exact origins of that name. But like I say, so just off the door, we'll wait in front of the bus, I'll push the button, we'll all cross together as a group. We'll stay together as a group up on the viewing platform, and then we'll come back together and repeat that, push the button and come back to the bus. Surprise Corner, so beautiful view of the Banff Springs Hotel. 757 rooms at the Banff Springs Hotel, and when they're fully staffed up, they'll have 1,300 staff. And you can also see the building off in the distance. It's a bit green. That's the Rimrock Hotel, and for some of you, that's where you'll start your gondola trip after the tour this morning. We'll take you guys up there. And if you look in the sun, you can see the gondola cars kind of moving, and they head right up to the upper station at the top of Sulphur Mountains. So if you're going up there today, later, you're lucky. I envy you. And we're also in a nice Douglas fir forest here. So we look up big Douglas fir trees, old trees with this thick fireproof bark that withstands forest fires over the centuries. Beautiful trees. Favorite habitat for cougars. Often we'll find if people do see cougars, often they're up in one of our Douglas fir trees. In fact, a few years back, we had a cougar here that was captured, and he was called Doug the Cougar, is what he was named locally, just for his kind of for liking the habitat of a Douglas fir tree. All right, so we're just passing by the Banff Centre for Arts and Creativity. So this is a post-secondary institution here in Banff. This was established in the early 1930s as the Banff School for Fine Arts, and the idea at the time for artists, whether it was in literature, theater, orchestra, photography, is that they would come out to Banff. It was called Holiday at School. So they also learn, they can do postgraduate work. Today, On our left we have all these little studios designed by different Canadian architects. The one immediately on our left with that little pole on top, designed by Douglas Cardinal, an Indigenous architect from Alberta. And now we pass by the main campus here. This is great to have in Banff for locals and visitors alike. We can see theater in the evening, sometimes poetry readings. Kind of makes Banff the cultural hub of the Rockies. It's a typical university campus. It has dorm rooms, cafeteria, all of that. There's a swimming pool, climbing wall, gyms. And one of the bonuses for us here living in Banff is we see recording artists. You know, Banff's not a big town, say 10,000 people, somewhere in that range. But recording artists, when they're going across Canada from Vancouver to Calgary to, you know, Toronto doing shows, they'll often stop in Banff and put on a show here. Like the last person that I saw here in concert was John Prine. I've also seen Blue Rodeo here. Great to have that here in Banff. And now, as we go along, we're going to skirt around Tunnel Mountain here. When the railway was first built through the valley, surveyed leading up to 1883 and the railway coming through here, the railway surveyors initially thought that they would need to build a tunnel through this small mountain that we're skirting around. And turned out, subsequent surveys found out that they could just go around the mountain, but the name stuck. But there is no tunnel, and there's an effort afoot today to name this mountain what it's been known for a long time by Indigenous people, and that's Sacred Buffalo Guardian Mountain. It kind of guards the entrance to the Bow Valley here. And we're going to wind our way around Tunnel Mountain. In our next stop, we'll learn a little bit about geology at what's called Hoodoo's Viewpoint. Welcome to Hoodoo's Viewpoint. So here's another opportunity for a restroom break. We have pit toilets here, a nice view of Mount Rundle and the Bow River down below, and a geological feature that's called a hoodoo. And we're going to go for a little walk here. And the way this works is we'll get the bus parked, but just pay attention here. I just have some details on how this works. So if you look out the right hand side of the bus, here we've got this little trail that heads down to the wooden handrail there. And what we'll do is you can get off the bus. We'll meet back at the bus at 10:20, but you can head off the bus to that handrail. You can go that far if you like. There's 3 viewpoints. You can go to the first one, which is right there. You can go to the second one or the third one, and it has these red chairs at it. It's up a little bit of a climb. If you want to climb up there, you can go ahead and do that. But let's not travel past those red chairs. Then you're out on a hike instead of a sightseeing tour. Restrooms are just right ahead of us, and we'll meet back here at what time? 10:20, and we'll head off to our next stop. And you can join me down. I'll be at the second viewpoint, the one below the red chairs, to learn a little bit about geology. How did these hoodoos form? What are the Canadian Rockies? What are they made out of? How are they different from the Rockies in the United States, for example? So lots to come on that. Join me down at the middle lookup, the second lookup. All right, welcome to Hoodoo's Viewpoint. So of course we love these mountains. We have Mount Rundle right here, beautiful to look at. But the question is, what are these mountains and how did they form? If you look at Mount Rundle, one of the telltale signs is that we have sedimentary rock here in the Canadian Rockies, limestone. You can see all the layers in the rock, and even if you were going to do, say, a PhD in the geology of the mountains in Banff National Park, you'd have to break it into 3 distinct steps. So the first is sedimentation, the second, mountain building, and then the third is erosion. And to break those down a little bit, we have to go way back in time to about 600 million years ago, even longer in some cases. And this continent, what's now North America, the part that we're on, it was a different climate. It's not many hundreds of millions of years ago. It was more down by the equator, raining a lot, and it would wash sedimentation, just sand and silt and mud, into a large inland sea, sometimes off the edge of the continent, and that formed up the layers of rock that we have here. So once those layers get thick enough, in our case sometimes 4 to 6 kilometers thick, a process of lithification occurs. So the rock, there's enough heat and pressure that all of that soft sand and silt and mud, that turns to stone. So that's our layers, that's sedimentation. That all happened hundreds of millions of years ago. The second step is mountain building, and you've heard of this before, maybe as plate tectonics back in school. And the idea there is that continents come together. Even if you were to look at an old school globe, you know, that you would have at home on the end table by the couch, if you look at the continents, you'll usually see that the mountains are around the outside edges of the continents because they've came together, pushed up mountains, moved apart. In our case here, 2 continents came together. The North American plate and the Pacific plate pushed up a huge plateau
of land, and they fused, they stayed together, and that's still the case today. So you could think of everything kind of from the Rocky Mountains eastward as being the North American plate, and everything from the Rocky Mountains westward as being the Pacific plate. They come together, and at first they just pushed up a huge height of land. There wasn't much in the way of mountains at first. That would occur through our third process, erosion, through successive waves of glaciation. You've got really thick ice sheets up on top of that plateau, and anywhere there's a dip, the ice is plastic, it can move, and it starts carving out our valleys. And we have a telltale U-shaped valley right here. If we look out towards Tunnel Mountain here, then we got Sulphur Mountain where the gondola is, and Mount Rundle. In between the valley bottom here, it goes down, but then it's flat on the bottom. If it was eroded just strictly by water, which is the case with some hills and mountain ranges that you'll see around the world, the valley would just be V-shaped in profile. But here it's U-shaped because we know that during the Wisconsin Ice Age, which ended about 12,000 years ago, we had a glacier coming down this valley, and it bulldozed out the flat valley bottom that we see. And like any glacier, some of you have been up to the Columbia ice fields already, or maybe you're going, you'll learn about glacial moraines, and we're standing on a glacial moraine right here. So you got to imagine that glacier's coming down the valley here, and it pushes up a big ridge of gravel on the side, as it does on the glaciers, and that's what we're standing on. And it's made up of organized kind of gravel and aggregate, and that's what the hoodoos are down here. So this is the outside corner, the glacier is going down, maybe it packs the aggregate just a little tighter into the outside corner. Some of this is a little more less easily eroded than in other parts, and so what we have is the hoodoos are left behind. As it rains now and erodes this ancient glacial moraine, we get the nice hoodoo viewpoint left behind. And today all we have left in the Rockies is erosion. So sedimentation, of course, that's finished. Mountain building, that's all finished here too. That ended about roughly 145 million years ago. And all we have left is erosion. So like a mountain like Mount Rundle here, through freeze-thaw cycles, a little water gets into the cracks in the limestone, it freezes, it expands. Our mountains just get a tiny bit smaller each year. It could be just like a centimeter or something like that. Whereas some mountain ranges, like the Himalayas, for example, are still in that mountain building phase. So our mountains get a little smaller each year. The Himalayas get a little bit bigger. If somebody ever invites you to go climb Mount Everest, you can just say, nah, it's still in the mountain building phase. It's going to be bigger next year. I'm not interested. I'll just wait another 20 million years, right? And that's the process here. So you can understand our mountains just through sedimentation, mountain building, and then finally erosion. And in this slide here, this shows everything that I talked about there. So sedimentation, mountain building, and erosion. Here we have the sedimentary layers. They were flat at one time, then the continents come together, push up the mountains. What's interesting here in the Canadian Rockies is it's all sedimentary rock. So what we have is the sedimentary layers, then the basement rock, which is just undisturbed, and then the Earth's mantle, which would be that molten core. And here in the Canadian Rockies, the basement rock never fractured, and so no molten material made it up. But if you go down to like the American Rockies in Colorado, they have examples where the basement rock cracked and allowed molten material to come up. So a little difference between our mountains here. The same range though, starts in Antelope Wells, New Mexico, finishes at the Liard River up in northern British Columbia, a long narrow chain. And the mountains in Colorado might be something like, you know, the big mountains there are the 14,000 foot peaks. Here that would be the 11 to 12,000 peaks. Our highest peak is Mount Robson, which is just under 13,000 feet. But in general, our peaks are lower. But in terms of elevation from valley bottom to mountain top, it's roughly the same. It's just down in Colorado. Everything is just a little bit higher. Up here in the Canadian Rockies, all a little lower. But we're looking at like 4,000 to 5,000 feet from valley bottom to mountain top would be pretty typical here in the Canadian Rockies. Yeah, so the question we had was, might we see a grizzly bear this morning? It's not, you know, it's unlikely, but it happens sometimes just when you think you're not going to see a bear, and then all of a sudden you do. We have kind of a lower number of grizzly bears in Banff National Park than you might see in some other regions, like out in coastal British Columbia or up in Alaska, for example. And it's for a specific reason here. Bears are interesting. So say we saw a grizzly bear that had 2 cubs, and those cubs would have been offspring from this year. So they would have been born in February, so February of 2022 here. But they'd be the result of that female bear mating last year in June. So bears mate in June, and then they go their separate ways. There's no mama bear and papa bear in nature, no bear families, just solitary bears, or else you'll have females who are raising cubs, which they'll do for 2.5 or 3 years. And so she'll mate in June, then she's on her own, and she's feeding all summer long, trying to get on a good percentage of body fat for when she enters hibernation, which around here at this latitude in these mountains, that'll happen sometime in October. or sorry, sometime in November, maybe as late as early December, just depends on the year. And then she goes into hibernation, and then she'll give birth to her cubs usually in about late February the following year. So that's about 8 months after mating. She's a big animal. She could weigh 350, 400 pounds, somewhere in that range. And she might have one cub, but often 2 or 3 as well. And you might think, okay, well, it's been 8 months since mating. She's this big animal. How much would these, what would these cubs look like when they're born? How much would they weigh? You might estimate, maybe 10 pounds, 15. Some people even estimate 50 pounds. But you might be surprised to learn that when her cubs are born, they'll just weigh somewhere around 1 pound, maybe 1.5 pounds. You could hold them in the palm of your hand. They have no fur, no claws, no teeth. Their eyes are closed. And why would that be? Why would the cubs be so small when they're born 8 months after mating? And it's because that female bear, she wasn't pregnant that whole time. See, bears, you could use the analogy that they're at the top of the food chain. Nothing preys on bears, or at least not healthy bears. And bears in their prime, maybe at the end of their lifespan. But in general, nothing preys on bears. Yet they can mate every year, or in the case of females, every year that they don't have cubs, they can mate multiple times with multiple partners. And so there's got to be some kind of mechanism in nature to prevent our landscape from being overrun with bears. And the females do that through an ingenious biological mechanism they have called delayed implantation. So they mate in June, they have fertilized eggs, but those eggs are free floating in the uterus. They're not pregnant yet, just potentially pregnant. Nature takes a wait and see approach to the pregnancy. It's like, go ahead and mate in June when you can, you're out of your den and you're out on the landscape, but we're not going to let you become pregnant unless it makes sense. And the only way it makes sense is if she can put on enough percentage of body fat over the summer and go into hibernation at a good healthy weight. And that's a signal from nature that there's enough food on that landscape. She was able to put on plenty of body fat, and so it's safe to add some more bears there. And what'll happen is that when she's alone inside the den, a hormonal signal will trigger the embryo to implant on the uterine wall. She becomes pregnant maybe sometime in early January, and 8 weeks later she'll give birth to those cubs sometime later in February. On the other hand, if she doesn't put on enough percentage of body fat, she won't become pregnant. That's nature's way of saying, you know what, there was enough food for you to survive there, but not quite enough that it makes sense to add more bears. Those fertilized eggs, they'll be reabsorbed into her body and she'll live to mate another year. And in this way, you could say that the population of bears in a given landscape, here in Banff National Park, for example, is truly self-regulating. We've always got close to the right number of bears. It's still a loss to lose a female bear of breeding age, say to the train tracks, for example. But over the long run, over time, that population will balance back out and we'll have just what this landscape can support. And here in Banff National Park, our Park Service estimates that's about 65 grizzly bears. Not a lot. If you took Banff National Park and put it out in coastal British Columbia or up in Alaska, much more food-rich area where they have the salmon that the bears are feeding on. We don't have that here on this side of the Continental Divide, no salmon over here. So if Banff National Park was over there, 6,600 square kilometers, it would have many more bears than what we have here. But this is a dry landscape. Wildlife biologists here use the phrase that our grizzly bears are chronically food stressed. They're surviving on dandelions and buffalo berry. They eat a tremendous amount of grass too, actually, if you watch them. And eating a largely vegetarian diet, and so it's a bit of a tough go for them here. Alright, welcome to Two Jack Lake. You folks on the right, you see the beautiful green water of Two Jack Lake. Mount Rundle in the background. We're going to pull over here. We can hop off the bus, get some photos. Stay back from the edge a little bit for your safety. And I'm happy to help you guys out with some photos here at Two Jack Lake. And this is all part of a hydroelectric project. More to come to that when we get to our next lake, which is just around the corner, called Lake Minnewanka. And that's beautiful Lake Minnewanka on our right. 22 kilometers long, 142 meters deep, so Banff's longest and deepest lake. And Lake Minnewanka was called Devil's Lake prior to that, prior to the water level being brought up. In 1941 is when the dam was built here. The lake water raised up to this level, about 14 meters actually. And they flooded out a resort community that was under water here called Minnewanka Landing. And even today it's popular with scuba divers. We'll see them sometimes heading out and they'll go down there, and there's some chimneys and building foundations, a bridge, a sidewalk, some household implements. All of that is down where Minnewanka Landing is. You might wonder, why do we have a hydroelectric dam like this inside a national park? Well, 1941, so we're talking about war times, right? Second World War. And the War Measures Act in Canada superseded the National Parks Act, and there was a need to create the hydroelectric dam to provide power to the city of Calgary to support the war effort. And what we're going to do here is take a little break at Lake Minnewanka. We've got a spot where we can pull over on the lake shore. You guys can wander down to the lake. There's some picnic tables. I'll set up there with our maple cream cookies. I've also got some hot chocolate along, and we'll give us somewhere around 30 to 35 minutes here at Lake Minnewanka, so feel free to wander along the lake shore if you like. We'll meet back at the bus right at 11 o'clock, and then we're going to head on to one more stop, and some of you will be staying on board to go up the Banff gondola, and I'll cover more on the gondola when you guys get back on the bus at 11 o'clock. We'll talk about who's heading up there, who isn't, and the game plan going forward. And then finally, there's restrooms here at Lake Minnewanka as well. They're the building with the solar panels on top. You'll see that as we pull into the parking lot here. And again, I'll have just beside the bus the cookies, the hot chocolate, and just as a reminder, we'll meet back at the bus at 11 o'clock and continue on for the last portion of our tour. And then finally, I was chatting a little bit about bears earlier in their biology. If you're interested, we'll get some hot chocolate, some cookies going, but you can also meet me at this garbage can right here in about 10 minutes, and we'll learn a little bit about how we keep bears, humans, our garbage, all of that stuff separate so that we can coexist as we should be. So who would like some hot chocolate? Also, feel free to grab some cookies for yourself. I'll just line them up here for you guys. You feel free to grab one. Like I say, feel free to wander down to the lake shore. It's a little steep here. You can go down this way, and there's a ramp that heads down to the lake shore. Back at the bus at 11. And join me in a couple minutes. We'll head over to those garbage cans and learn a little bit about how we keep bears out of our garbage. Fitting that we stand beside one of these bear-proof garbage cans. If you've encountered these, you know that they can be a bit difficult to get into, and that's by design. They're bear-proof. If you look here, there was a time in the park where you could even go out on a sightseeing tour and feed bears. You got the Rocky Mountain Tour Company here, guests feeding bears, and inevitably that led to problems. Bears were getting into garbage in our garbage dumps, and actually through the 1960s and 70s, the average weight of a grizzly bear here in Banff Park increased from 400 to 600 pounds, and park wardens were relocating bears sometimes 70 to 90 times, like 90 separate times in a summer. Something needed to be done, and there was some early attempts to keep bears out of our garbage, like we have the hanging garbage can here, this one with a little concrete shroud around it. None of those really worked, and inevitably, eventually something would happen, and that was, there was long this recognition that it wasn't really bears that were the problem, it was people. In fact, I have here an old kind of public notice from the 1940s for people to kind of, make sure that they're not leaving food out for bears, not approaching bears. And in fact, one wildlife biologist at the time, here's a quote from 1943, he was really critical of the way that bears could go into the garbage cans in the back alleys in town and at the garbage dump. And he said, if the bears were able to reverse the proceedings and set up stands in our cities, dispensing free beers in unlimited quantities, a comparable situation would result. So something needed to be done after the last fatal bear attack in 1980, and that was this garbage can. In Banff National Park, they approached this company, Haul All Equipment in Lethbridge, Alberta, and asked them if they could make a bear-proof garbage can, and they said that they could, they'd give it a try, but they had to actually come back to the park and say, you know what, we can make it bear-proof, we just can't figure out how to make it so that people can also get in there, but not bears. And that's where a wildlife biologist came into play. He knew something about bears that you would know. If you have a dog at home, that's bears can walk, they can shake a paw, that kind of thing, just like a dog. But one thing they can't do, just like your dog, is turn their paw over. Their anatomy doesn't allow that, and that's how we can get into these garbage bins and get them open. And they're sloped like this so they shed snow, the lid can't be accidentally opened. Installed starting in 1981, and 9 years later, by 1990, our bear problems, the garbage problems, had all but disappeared. Actually, by 1990, the average weight of a grizzly bear dropped from 600 pounds to 400 pounds, and park wardens were rarely tranquilizing and relocating bears by by 1990. All right, so before we leave Lake Minnewanka, thanks for coming back on time, everybody. Before we leave, we should discuss who's going up to the gondola and who is not with us. So today we have Lindsay Herman. You guys are heading up to the gondola with us, and so is Marcus Jardine. And you're heading up to the gondola, and we're going to pick you up there at 2 o'clock. So what this means, we're going to drive you up to the gondola. You guys are going to ride up the mountain. It's an 8-minute ride up. You'll come back down. Your uptime, I'll help you out with. Your downtime is going to be, you're going to get in line at 1:30, on the gondola at 1:40, make your way back down, and we'll pick you up there at 2 o'clock. You'll see a Discover Banff vehicle, somebody with a blue uniform on. Is there anybody else that has gondola tickets whose names I didn't mention? Yes? Yeah, so what time are your tickets for? Okay, so your tickets are for 2 o'clock. You might want me to just drop you off back at the hotel, and you could make your way up there on public transit. Oh, and somebody, okay, your tickets are for 12:20. Okay, that works. We can drop you off there, but you don't have the package where we pick you up. So I'm happy to take you up there, but you'll find your way back to town on public transit. No big deal. It's super easy. There's an LED readout up there that tells you which time you're coming back down. And then for everybody else that's not going up the gondola, we're just going to do our hotel drop-offs in the same order that we did our pickups as we head back into town. Any questions for me before we head off? Yeah, this is the former site of Bankhead, so an early coal mining town. It might surprise you that we had resource development in the national park, but just up here on the slopes of Cascade Mountain, the Canadian Pacific Railway had a coal mine and developed the town of Bankhead here to support the coal mine. The 20-year town, it's known as. It closed down in 1922. For locals around here, especially from about the 1920s, well up into the 1990s, a favorite personality in Banff was Louis Trono. He was born in Bankhead in 1909. He was too small to shovel coal. He wasn't big enough to help out in the mines, and so one day he picked up a trombone, and that was the start of his career here, playing in orchestras in Banff at the Banff Springs Hotel and up at the Chateau Lake Louise. Louis Trono no longer with us anymore, but fondly remembered around Banff. Today, it's just a historic site, and sometimes folks will wander around through Bankhead here, check out some of the heritage buildings that are down there. But what this really represents is kind of a change in parks management. So we see a transition in national parks from being places of conservation with some resource development, and then eventually focusing more on wilderness, where we get up to the present here or today, where it's all about ecological integrity. That's what the focus of a national park is today. And as we drive back into town, and before we do our first drop-offs, we'll talk a little bit about our national park system, why it exists, and what the point is of each national park to protect and also present these landscapes to Canadians and international visitors. As we make our way back into town here, I should chat a little bit about our national park systems plan, and the whole reason to be for national parks today. I just earlier mentioned the evolution of parks from conservation and then up to ecological integrity today. Today we have 44 national parks in Canada, and then 39 eco-regions. So you'll remember earlier in the tour I talked about our eco-regions. Here in Banff National Park we have the Montane, where we are right now, which makes up just under 5% of the park. We've got the subalpine, that's the mountainsides, and then the alpine, which is roughly split between the rest of the park. So biologists have identified 39 ecoregions in Canada, and these could be the prairie grassland, a marine environment, the Arctic tundra. We have just the 3 here in Banff, the Montane, the subalpine, and the alpine. And the whole point of each national park is to protect the ecoregions that it represents, and also present those ecoregions to Canadians and international visitors. And that's an interesting kind of concept there, that you would protect something but also present it to people. Maybe the easiest way to protect the park would just be to put up borders and not allow anybody in, and then it's just complete protection. But then people need to value a landscape. These are our national parks, we created them. We need to value the landscape, develop a sense of place, cherish the landscape, come to love the wildlife and the lakes and the waterfalls. And for that reason, it's important that a national park is also presented to Canadians. And who knows, they're equally important, both protecting and presenting. But without visitors like yourself, there would be fewer people that have a voice to speak for Banff National Park. So thanks for visiting today. I think in a small way you do a little bit to help protect the park just by being here to be sure that it continues to be protected and presented to Canadians and international visitors into the future. And I'm going to wrap up the tour there today, but before we get back to our first hotel drop-off, which is just in about 3 minutes here, I should just mention some places you might like to eat when you're in town. And what are we at here? We're midweek right now, in October. Shouldn't need reservations at too many places. Maybe tonight you might choose to go to the Maple Leaf restaurant right downtown on Banff Ave. They have braised beef short rib, a nice setting, white tablecloths, or you could choose to go over to a new place we got down by the post office for some something a little quicker. If you don't have much time, go to Hanky. It's Korean street food. They've got some great options over there. Breakfast tomorrow morning. A lot of folks like Talulu's in Banff. It's a Cajun restaurant, New Orleans style Cajun food on Wolf Street, just off of Banff Ave. You can get eggs Shannon or eggs bourbon, or they also just have waffles and pancakes. In terms of other activities that you might enjoy in town, some of you are going up the gondola, so that's already one great thing to do here in town. We also have horseback riding trips with Banff trail riders that you might want to check out. The last few summers I see a lot of folks around town enjoying e-bike rentals, so maybe you might rent an e-bike and those folks can help you out with where you might want to go for a ride. There's always the climb up Tunnel Mountain, so just a short hike from the edge of town with great vantage points up there. Lots to do in Banff. Earlier in the tour I talked about Peter and Catherine White, as you recall. You might head over to the White Museum if you're looking for that kind of experience. So lots to do. If you have any questions as you're getting off the bus, just let me know. And us tour guides always appreciate it too if you can leave a review of the tour. So, you know, we were together this morning. We went to the Banff Springs Hotel, Bow Falls, the Park Administration Building, the Cascade Gardens at time, and then we were over to Surprise Corner and over to the Hoodoo's Viewpoint and up here at Tujak Lake and Lake Minnewanka. With this, you've seen all the beautiful stuff right around the town of Banff. We have other tours that go up to Lake Louise, the Columbia Ice Fields. We have hikes that you can book. But for this tour specifically, it'd be great to see a review from you. You might mention my name, Jeff. Do that on Google Reviews or TripAdvisor. And great to be with you folks this morning. So thanks for visiting. Thanks for choosing Discover Banff Tours, and enjoy the rest of your time in the Canadian Rockies.